The chaos of O'Hare's K terminal was a symphony of stress, but for one passenger it was about to become a nightmare. A gate agent's sneer, a privileged couple's lie, and 2 security officers high on their own authority. They saw a black woman in a hoodie arguing. They saw an easy target. They decided to make an example of her, grabbing her arms, dragging her like a criminal in front of hundreds of silent onlookers. What they didn't see, what they couldn't possibly know, was the gold shield tucked in her pocket, and the federal storm they were about to unleash. Gate K-12 at Chicago O'Hare was a pressure cooker, and the lid was rattling. The 4:30 p.m. flight to Washington, D.C. was already delayed by an hour, a fact that had soured the mood of every passenger packed into the cramped waiting area. The air smelled of stale Cinnabon and floor wax. People were sprawled across the uncomfortable metal chairs, their faces illuminated by the blue light of their phones. Among them, sitting near a charging kiosk, was Imani Wallace. To the casual observer, she was nobody. She wore simple black joggers, worn-out New Balance sneakers, and a grey Northwestern University hoodie with the hood pulled down. Her hair was pulled back into a tight, professional bun, and she wore no makeup. She looked like a tired graduate student, or maybe just someone who valued comfort over style for a cross-country flight. She was reading a well-worn paperback, but her eyes, sharp and analytical, flickered up from the page more often than she turned it. Imani was not a student. She was Special Agent Imani Wallace of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Chicago Field Office, and she was not traveling for pleasure. She was working. Her target was sitting 30 feet away, reading the Wall Street Journal and pretending to be just another annoyed business traveler. He was known to the Bureau as the Ghost, a high-level facilitator for a human trafficking ring that stretched from Eastern Europe to the Midwest. Imani and her team had been building a case on him for 18 months. Today, he was scheduled to fly to D.C. to meet his East Coast distributor. Imani was his shadow, part of a multi-state surveillance operation. Her job was simple: observe, follow, and do not, under any circumstances, engage. She couldn't blow her cover. The entire operation depended on the Ghost believing he was safe. The gate agent, a woman in her late 40s with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read Brenda, clicked her microphone. Her voice was a nasal whine that cut through the murmur of the crowd. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We will now begin boarding flight 2118 to Washington Dulles. We apologize for the delay. We will begin with our active duty military personnel, families traveling with small children, and anyone needing special assistance." A small, grateful line formed. Imani watched, her senses on high alert. The Ghost hadn't moved. Good. We will now invite our first class and Premier Access members to board. This is when the trouble began. A couple, who had been loudly complaining about the delay for the last 20 minutes, sprang to their feet. The woman, dripping in David Yurman jewelry and carrying a pristine white Louis Vuitton duffel, was Karen Miller. Her husband, Chad Miller, was a broad-shouldered man in a tight pink polo shirt, his face flushed with impatience. They were, as Imani had already clocked from their boarding passes when they'd flashed them at Brenda earlier, in Group 5. Karen and Chad pushed past an elderly man leaning on a cane and wedged themselves into the front of the first-class line. The gate agent, Brenda, didn't even look up from her screen, simply motioning for the line to move forward. The elderly man, clearly flustered, said, "Excuse me, I believe I'm in this group." Karen Miller turned, her smile a venomous slash. "Oh, I'm sure you are," she sneered, then ignored him, pushing her designer bag forward. Imani felt the familiar, hot spike of injustice. It was the small-scale bullying she despised, but she kept her head down. Not your fight, Wallace. The mission. But then Brenda began scanning passes. An active duty soldier in uniform, who was actually in the pre-boarding group, got stuck behind the Millers. He was young, maybe 20, and looked too polite to say anything. Imani sighed. She couldn't help it. She stood up, leaving her bag on the chair, and walked calmly to the line. "Excuse me, ma'am," Imani said, her voice quiet but firm, addressing Corin. "I believe the agent called for first class. You're holding up the military personnel." Karen Miller spun around. Her eyes raked over Imani's hoodie and joggers with blatant disgust. "And who are you?" she spat. "The line police? Mind your own business." "I'm a passenger on this flight," Imani said, keeping her voice level. "And you're boarding out of turn. That gentleman," she nodded to the soldier, "should be boarding. We're Premier Access," Chad Miller boomed, stepping in front of his wife. He was a full foot taller than Imani. He puffed out his chest, a classic intimidation display. "So why don't you go back to your seat in the back of the plane and shut up?" This commotion finally got Brenda's attention. She looked up, not at the Millers, but at Imani. Her eyes narrowed. She saw exactly what the Millers saw. A black woman in a hoodie, causing trouble with her valued customers. "Ma'am," Brenda said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Is there a problem here?" "Yes," Imani said calmly. "These passengers are in Group 5. They cut the line. You should be boarding this soldier." Brenda's face tightened. "Ma'am, I will handle the boarding process. These passengers are my customers. You, however, are creating a disturbance. Please step out of the line." "I'm not in the line," Imani replied, her patience thinning. "I'm just asking you to follow your own airline's policy." From the corner of her eye, Imani saw the ghost look up. His gaze lingered for a second too long. "No." No, Imani immediately tried to disengage. "You know what? Never mind. It's not important. My mistake." She turned to walk away, but it was too late. Karen Miller saw weakness and pounced. "Oh no, you don't!" Karen shrieked, her voice suddenly piercing. "You don't get to harass us and just walk away. She threatened me. She threatened my husband." This was a blatant, shocking lie. The entire gate area went silent. Everyone was watching. "She put her hands on me," Karen yelled, clutching Chad's arm. "She tried to push me." Chad, seeing his opening, roared, "Yeah, I saw it. She shoved my wife." Imani stopped dead. She turned, her hands raised slightly, palms open. "That is absolutely untrue. I never touched you." But Brenda was already on her walkie-talkie, her face a mask of furious self-importance. "Security to gate K-12. I have an aggressive passenger, physically assaulting another. I need removal. Immediately." Imani felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Across the room, the ghost slowly folded his newspaper. He was watching. The mission was evaporating. The lie hung in the air, thick and toxic. Karen Miller had transformed, her face now a mask of faux victimhood, tears welling in her eyes as she hid behind her husband's bulky frame. Chad Miller stared at Imani with pure, unadulterated rage, as if she had actually done what his wife claimed. The surrounding passengers, a jury of strangers, murmured amongst themselves. Some looked at Imani with suspicion, others with pity, but no one spoke up. The young soldier looked at the floor, clearly desperate to be anywhere else. "Ma'am, you need to stay right there," Brenda, the gate agent, commanded, pointing a long acrylic nail at Imani. "Security is on its way. You are being removed from this flight." "Removed?" Imani's voice was sharp now, the last shred of passenger mode fading. "For what? For pointing out the boarding order? For being lied about? For assaulting my customers?" Brenda snapped. We have zero tolerance. I have 2 witnesses." She gestured to the Millers, who both nodded vigorously. "This is insane," Imani said, talking more to herself than to Brenda. She took a step back, her mind racing. She had to de-escalate. She couldn't get into a spat with airport security. Not now, not with her target right there. The ghost was still seated, but his placid demeanor was gone. He was alert, his head on a swivel, assessing the situation. He was assessing her. She had to choose, the mission or her own dignity. The mission always came first. "Look," Imani said, raising her hands in a gesture of surrender. "This is a misunderstanding. I'm sorry if I caused a disturbance. I'll just go back to my seat." She turned again, but Chad Miller stepped into her path. "Not so fast," he grunted. "You're not going anywhere. We're pressing charges." "Pressing charges?" Imani repeated, baffled. The sheer audacity of it was stunning. Before she could say another word, 2 figures in dark blue uniforms hustled through the crowd. They were airport security, not TSA. Port Authority Police. One was a tall, older officer with a bristly grey mustache and a name tag that read M. Sullivan. The other was younger, darker-haired, and looked nervous. His tag read D. Jenkins. Officer Sullivan arrived with the energy of a man who had been waiting all day to crack a skull. He bypassed the Millers and Brenda and marched directly up to Imani. He was 6'3" and built like a retired linebacker, using his size to loom over her. "This the one?" he barked at Brenda. "Yes, officer," Brenda said, her voice suddenly sweet and helpful. "This woman, I don't know her name. She came out of nowhere and shoved Mrs. Miller. Tried to start a fight when I confronted her." "That is a complete and total lie," Imani said, her voice dropping into a low, serious register. "Officer, I was standing right here. I asked them to wait for their boarding group. They and this gate agent became hostile." Sullivan ignored her words. He was looking at her hoodie, her sneakers, her race. His eyes were cold and flat. He'd already made up his mind. "Mum, I need you to come with us. We're going to a processing room," Sullivan said. It wasn't a request. "I am not going anywhere," Imani stated. "I am a ticketed passenger, and I have done nothing wrong. If you want to get statements, you should get them from everyone, including that soldier." She nodded toward the young man, who now looked physically ill. Sullivan's lip curled. He hated being told how to do his job, especially by someone he had already dismissed as a problem. "You don't get to tell me what to do," he said, his voice a low growl. "You're causing a disturbance. You're being detained. Now give me your ID." "I will show you my ID, but I am not being detained," Imani said. "You have no probable cause." "Probable cause?" Sullivan let out a short, barking laugh. "My probable cause is 2 witnesses and a gate agent telling me you assaulted someone. That's assault and battery. Now give me the ID or I'll add resisting arrest to the charge." "Mike," Officer Jenkins said, shifting his feet. "Maybe we should just talk to the witnesses first. Get her side of it over there." He pointed to a quiet corner. "We'll get her side of it in the holding cell, rookie," Sullivan snapped, never taking his eyes off Imani. "Last chance. ID. Now. Or we do this the hard way." Imani felt the blood pounding in her temples. This was a classic, unavoidable escalation. Sullivan wanted a fight. He was daring her. And across the room, the ghost stood up. He slung his laptop bag over his shoulder. He began to drift, slowly, not toward the gate, but toward the terminal exit. He was bolting. The commotion had spooked him. He thought Imani might be law enforcement. Or worse, he just saw a perfect opportunity to vanish while security was occupied. Imani's heart hammered against her ribs. The mission, The mission. She had no choice. She couldn't let him walk. She had to blow her cover. "Okay," Imani said, her entire demeanor shifting. The tired student vanished, replaced by cold, hard authority. "Everybody calm down. Officer Sullivan, you need to listen to me very carefully." "I'm done listening," Sullivan snarled. He reached out and grabbed her left arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. "You're under arrest." The moment Sullivan laid his hands on her, Imani's training kicked in. She didn't fight. She didn't pull away. She rooted herself. She became a 140-pound anchor of muscle and bone. Sullivan tugged, expecting her to stumble. She didn't budge. "Get your hands off me," Imani ordered. Her voice was no longer a request. It was a command. The shift in her tone, the sudden, unshakable confidence, only enraged Sullivan. He saw it as defiance. "Resisting, huh? Big mistake," he yelled, partly for the crowd, partly to intimidate her. He yanked harder. "Jenkins, grab her other arm." Officer Jenkins, his face pale, hesitated. "Mike, I don't know." "Do your job, Jenkins," Sullivan bellowed. Jenkins reluctantly grabbed Imani's right arm. Now she had two large men attempting to muscle her. "Stop!" Imani yelled, her voice now loud enough to cut through the terminal noise. "You are making a catastrophic mistake." Yeah, tell it to the judge," Sullivan grunted, putting his shoulder into it. He and Jenkins began to physically drag her, her sneakers squealing against the polished floor. The crowd gasped. Phones, which had been lurking at people's sides, were now up. A dozen cameras were recording. Karen Miller watched with a smug, satisfied smirk. Chad Miller had his arms crossed, nodding as if justice was being served. Brenda, the gate agent, had already turned back to her computer, as if the human being she'd just had arrested was a piece of trash she'd swept off her desk. They were dragging her, literally dragging a black woman through an airport terminal, while two white liars watched in triumph. The humiliation was a physical, burning sensation. Imani looked past Sullivan's red, sweating face. She could see the ghost. He was 20 yards away. 10 more, and he'd be at the terminal concourse, where he could blend in with thousands of people and be gone forever. 18 months of work. Gone, no. "Officer Sullivan," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "I am a federal officer, and you are interfering with an active surveillance operation." Sullivan laughed, a genuine, hearty laugh. "A federal officer, in a sweatsuit, that's a new one. Lady, you just added impersonating an officer to your sheet. You're in a world of trouble." He gave another violent tug, pulling her off balance. Her shoulder bag, which she'd managed to sling over her body, was wrenched open. Her paperback, a bottle of water, and a set of keys clattered to the floor. And something else. A small, black leather wallet. It landed on the floor and flipped open, revealing the glint of gold. Imani, Sullivan, and Jenkins all saw it at the same time. Jenkins froze instantly. He let go of her arm as if he'd been electrocuted. "Mike! Holy!" Sullivan, however, was too deep in his rage. He didn't stop. He kicked the wallet away without looking at it. "Don't try any cheap tricks." He still had her by one arm, yanking her toward the exit. "He's getting away!" Imani shouted, no longer caring about the crowd. She pointed with her free hand. "The man in the blue jacket! He's the target! Stop him!" Sullivan didn't even look. "You're not pinning this on some random guy. You're coming with me." He had dragged her almost to the jet bridge entrance, away from the main crowd. He slammed her against the wall. "You're done. You understand me? You are done." Imani had had enough. The ghost was at the edge of the concourse. The mission was blown. Her cover was blown. Sullivan had assaulted her. The airline had failed her. The Millers had lied. The gloves were off. With a speed that shocked Sullivan, Imani spun. It wasn't a violent move, but a simple, explosive pivot, using his own grip and momentum against him. She broke his grasp, spun inside his guard, and in one fluid motion reached into her hoodie pocket. Sullivan, thinking she was reaching for a weapon, fumbled for his own. But she wasn't reaching for a gun. She pulled out her other badge holder, the one on her person. She snapped it open and thrust it into his face. The gold shield of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, with the eagle and the words U.S. Department of Justice gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Special Agent Imani Wallace, FBI. Her voice was not a shout. It was a sonic boom. It echoed in the small space. You just assaulted a federal officer. You just interfered with a multi-state human trafficking investigation. And you just let my suspect walk. The silence that followed Imani's words was more deafening than the airport chaos. Officer Sullivan, who had been a moment from tackling her, froze. His eyes, wide with disbelief, slowly focused on the badge. He wasn't looking at a problem passenger anymore. He was looking at a federal nightmare. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a pasty, sickly grey. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Officer Jenkins, who was already several feet back, raised his hands. Oh my God, Mike, I told you to wait." Karen and Chad Miller, who had been enjoying the show from the front of the boarding line, stopped smiling. Karen's perfectly made-up face crumpled in confusion, then dawning horror. Chad's tough guy posture evaporated. Even Brenda, the gate agent, looked up from her screen, her eyes wide. Imani Wallace stood tall, the badge held rock steady in her hand. The transformation was absolute. The tired student was gone. In her place was an operative, an agent, radiating an aura of cold, lethal authority. "Officer Jenkins," Imani snapped, her voice cutting through the silence. Jenkins flinched, as if she'd struck him. "Get on your radio. Now, I want a perimeter set up on all Terminal K exits. Suspect is a white male, 6'1", approximately 190 pounds, blue sports coat, grey hoodie underneath, black baseball cap, carrying a black Toomey laptop bag. Name is unknown, alias The Ghost. He is a high-priority flight risk. Move!" Jenkins, galvanized by the sheer command in her voice, fumbled for his radio. "Yes, ma'am. Right away, ma'am." He began barking the description into his shoulder mic, his voice cracking with panic. Imani then turned her gaze back to Sullivan. His arms were half raised, his face a mask of abject terror. "Officer Sullivan," she said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. "You put your hands on me. You ignored a federal officer's directive. You obstructed justice. You assaulted me. Give me your badge. And your sidearm." Agent Wallace, I didn't know," Sullivan stammered, his tough guy persona shattering into a million pieces. They said, you looked." "You looked what, officer?" Imani interrupted, taking a step toward him. "You looked like I wasn't a valued customer. You looked like I was easy to push around. You looked like I was lying and they, she jabbed a finger toward the Millers, were telling the truth. I was just following procedure. Your procedure is to assault a passenger who is calmly trying to de-escalate. Your procedure is to believe a blatant lie from a woman in diamonds and ignore the woman in a hoodie. Your procedure is to let a human trafficker walk right out the front door while you flex your muscles for a crowd." She held out her hand. "Your weapon. Place it on the floor. Slowly. And your badge. Now." With trembling hands, Officer Sullivan unholstered his Glock and placed it on the ground, kicking it toward her. He then slowly, agonizingly, unclipped his badge from his belt and handed it to her. The humiliation was total. He was disarmed, literally and figuratively, in front of the very crowd he'd been performing for. "Stand against that wall," Imani ordered. "Hands behind your back." Sullivan, his eyes glassy, did exactly as he was told. He was broken. Imani then turned, her eyes landing on the three people who started it all: Brenda, Karen, and Chad. She stalked toward them. Brenda physically recoiled behind her podium. "You," Imani said to Brenda, "shut down this gate. Nobody gets on that plane. Nobody leaves this area. This is a federal crime scene." I can't," Brenda stammered. "The flight. I'll be fired." Imani flashed the badge so close to Brenda's face they almost touched. "You will be fired and prosecuted for interfering with a federal investigation if you do not lock that jet bridge door and call your supervisor in the next 10 seconds. Do you understand me?" Brenda, her face white, nodded and frantically started hitting buttons on her console. Finally, Imani turned to the Millers. Karen was trying to blend into the wall, her Louis Vuitton bag now clutched to her chest like a shield. Chad was attempting to look invisible. It didn't work. "And you too," Imani said, her voice soft, which was somehow more terrifying than her yelling. "Pressing charges, were you?" "It was a misunderstanding," Chad blurted out, trying a placating smile. "We were just, things got heated. Our mistake. We'll just be on our way." He reached for his wife's arm, intending to slip away into the crowd. "You're not going anywhere," Imani said. "You're not going to DC. You're not going home. You're coming with me." "Now wait a minute," Chad said, his bluster returning slightly. "You can't arrest us. We're the victims." He pointed at Imani, then realized his mistake. "I mean, you filed a false report," Imani said, ticking off the charges on her fingers. "You lied to a gate agent. You then repeated those lies to a Port Authority officer, causing him to assault me. And in doing so, you created a diversion that allowed a federal fugitive to escape. That is, at minimum, interfering with a federal investigation. That's a 10-year minimum felony. So yes, I can arrest you. And I am." Imani pulled her phone from her pocket. She hit a single number on her speed dial. "This is Special Agent Wallace," she said into the phone. "I have a 1099. Officer down. No, I am not injured. I am at O'Hare, Terminal K, Gate K12. I have 2 Port Authority officers who have interfered with the operation. One is disarmed and detained. The target, Ghost, is in the wind, last seen heading for the main concourse. I need a full Chicago PD perimeter, and I need an arrest team. Fast. I have 2 civilian suspects in custody for interference. Their names are Karen and Chad Miller." She hung up. She looked at the Millers. Their faces were the definition of life-ending panic. "You two," she said, pointing to the wall next to Officer Sullivan. "Hands where I can see them. Wait for my colleagues. They'll be here in 5 minutes, and they won't be as polite as I've been." The 5 minutes that followed were the longest of everyone's lives. The passengers at Gate K12 were held in a stunned, silent tableau, all filming the scene. Officer Jenkins was still on his radio, coordinating the terminal-wide search, his voice strained. Officer Sullivan was sweating profusely, staring at the floor, a broken man. Brenda, the gate agent, was on the phone with her supervisor, crying, and the Millers, they were shaking. Karen's fake tears had been replaced by very real, mascara-streaked sobs of terror. Chad looked like he was going to throw up. Then, the real FBI arrived. They didn't come in with sirens, they came in quiet. 4 men and 2 women, all in sharp, dark business suits. They moved through the crowd like sharks. Their leader, a tall, imposing man with graying temples, was Special Agent in Charge, SAC, Reynolds, Imani's boss. He walked straight to Imani, his face grim. He didn't look at Sullivan, the Millers, or anyone else. "Wallace, you okay?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm fine, boss," Imani said, handing him Sullivan's badge. "Just peachy." "Target?" "Gone," Imani said, her voice laced with fury. "This mess gave him the window. Jenkins has PD locking down the exits, but he's the ghost. He's gone." Reynolds cursed under his breath. He then turned, and for the first time, surveyed the scene. He looked at Sullivan, then at the Millers. "These are the officers. Sullivan was the aggressor. Jenkins tried to de-escalate," Imani reported. "And they," she nodded to the Millers, "are the ones who started it. They lied. Said I assaulted them. Created the diversion." Reynolds nodded. "Take them." Two of the agents stepped forward and, with practiced, no-nonsense efficiency, put Chad and Karen Miller in handcuffs. "Wait!" Chad yelped, as the cold steel clicked around his wrists. "This is a mistake. I'm Chad Miller. I'm a vice president at Braxton Logistics. You can't do this!" At the mention of Braxton Logistics, SAC Reynolds and Imani locked eyes. A jolt of electricity passed between them. "Braxton Logistics," Reynolds repeated, his voice suddenly very, very interested. "Yes," Chad said, thinking this was his key. "We're a major shipping partner for the city. Call my lawyer. This is insane." Reynolds looked at Imani. "Get them out of here. Take them to the field office, not the Port Authority. Ours. And put them in separate interrogation rooms." He then turned to one of his agents. "Get me everything we have on Braxton Logistics, now." As the Millers were led away, with Karen wailing, "My bag! My Louis Vuitton! You can't take me!" Imani turned back to her boss. "Boss? Braxton Logistics? We've been looking at them for 6 months as a potential shipping front for the Ghost's European counterparts," Reynolds said grimly. "We thought they were just a piece of the puzzle, a possible link." Imani's mind was on fire. The diversion. What if it wasn't random? Reynolds' eyes hardened. "You think they knew? You think they created this scene on purpose to help him escape?" "They were in Group 5, boss. They shoved their way to the front. They lied, loudly, about me assaulting them. They escalated at every turn. They goaded me. They goaded that cop." Imani looked over at Sullivan, who was now being quietly spoken to by another agent. "It was too perfect," Imani whispered. "They didn't just stumble into this. They created it." The full, horrifying picture was becoming clear. This wasn't just a case of entitlement and prejudice. This was a criminal conspiracy. Karen and Chad Miller weren't just two obnoxious passengers. They were part of the ring. They were there as decoys, and Imani, by trying to enforce a simple rule, had walked right into their trap. They used her, and Officer Sullivan's own prejudice, as weapons to free their boss. The hard part was, it had worked. The ghost was gone. But in his place, he had left something even better. He had left his entire US logistics team gift-wrapped. The wheels of justice are often said to turn slowly. But when they are propelled by the full, furious weight of the US Department of Justice, they grind with a speed and finality that is terrifying to behold. The hard karma that followed the O'Hare incident was not a single lightning bolt. It was a devastating, multi-pronged, and systemic dismantling of every person who had participated in that day's injustice. The fallout began before the Millers were even buckled into the back of an unmarked FBI vehicle. The passenger videos, dozens of them, had hit TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. The story was irresistible. Airport security drags black woman for arguing. Then she flashes her FBI badge. The media frenzy was instantaneous and global. The airline, the Chicago Port Authority, and the FBI were all inundated with calls. The court of public opinion had rendered its verdict in under an hour, and it was savage. But the real reckoning was happening far from the public eye. For Karen and Chad Miller. Chad Miller, accustomed to plush boardrooms and obsequious assistants, was marched into a 10-foot, windowless interrogation room at the Chicago field office. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. His $5,000 Brioni suit felt like a clown costume under the buzzing fluorescent lights. He was still in his Chad persona, arrogant, impatient, and threatening. "My lawyer is on his way," he snapped as SAC Reynolds and another agent entered the room. "And he's not some ambulance chaser. He's the best in Chicago. You have no idea the mistake you've made. This is harassment. This is false imprisonment." Reynolds sat down calmly, placing a thin, nondescript folder on the metal table. He didn't open it. "You're right, Mr. Miller," Reynolds said, his voice flat. "We should clear this up. We're not detaining you for what happened at the airport." Chad paused, his prepared speech dying on his lips. "What? Then what? That's the only... We're detaining you," Reynolds said, leaning forward, "for your work at Braxton Logistics. Specifically, your relationship with a network of Eastern European shell companies. We've had a flag on your shipping manifests for 6 months. We just couldn't find the US coordinator, the man who was personally signing off on the fraudulent import forms, the man who was facilitating the entire US operation for the Ghost." The blood didn't just drain from Chad's face, it vanished. He turned a waxy, translucent grey. The VP bravado evaporated, replaced by the raw animal panic of a cornered rat. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his hands were shaking so violently he had to hide them under the table. "You don't?" Reynolds asked politely. "You didn't text the Ghost an hour before the flight. She's here. I think it's the one we talked about. We're on it." Reynolds had no such text. He was bluffing, a shot in the dark based on Imani's new theory. Chad's face, a sudden, gasping, open-mouthed horror, told him it was a direct hit. "Your little performance at the gate?" Reynolds continued, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. "It wasn't random. It was a plan. You knew she was surveillance. You didn't just stumble into creating a diversion. You are the diversion." Chad broke, a full, complete, and pathetic collapse. He began to sob, his body heaving. "It was just a favor. He said he just needed a distraction. I move the containers. I don't ask what's in them, I just move them." In the room next door, Karen Miller was taking a very different approach. She was playing the victim to the hilt, this time in front of Special Agent Imani Wallace herself. "This is outrageous!" Karen shrieked, her face a mask of indignation. "I am the victim here. That officer, Sullivan or whatever, he was just doing his job. You were the one causing the trouble. I am going to sue you. I am going to sue the FBI. I am going to sue the whole airport." Imani sat opposite her, perfectly still. She had not said a word, simply letting Karen exhaust herself. When the tirade finally wound down, Imani leaned forward. "Do you know what the mandatory minimum sentence for conspiracy to commit human trafficking is, Karen?" Imani asked, her voice quiet. Karen laughed, a brittle, ugly sound. "That's absurd. What does that have to do with me?" Imani slid a single photograph across the table. It wasn't of the Ghost. It was of a terrified-looking teenage girl with braces, huddled in a blanket at a Texas recovery center. "This is Anya," Imani said. "She's 16. She was found 3 months ago in a Braxton Logistics container at the Port of Houston, listed on the manifest as auto parts." She said the man who locked her in the container was American. He was wearing a pink polo shirt and a very expensive watch. He was on the phone with his wife, who he called Car Bear, complaining about the cargo delaying his flight. Karen's face went blank. The blood, the life, the smugness, it all drained away, leaving a hollow, terrified shell. She looked at the door, then at Imani, her mouth opening and closing. It was all him, she finally whispered, the lie forming on her lips. Chad, it was all Chad. I didn't know anything. I just go where he tells me. I'm a victim, too. It didn't matter. They both sang. They turned on each other and on the ghost, desperate to save themselves. The result? Chad Miller, faced with a mountain of evidence from his own servers, pled guilty to his role as the U.S. head of the trafficking ring. He was sentenced to 25 years in a maximum security federal prison. Karen Miller, for her active role in the conspiracy and for filing a false report against a federal officer, was sentenced to 12 years. Their assets, their suburban mansion, their luxury cars, and every last David Yurman bracelet were seized by the federal government to be paid out to a victims' restitution fund. For Officer Mike Sullivan, Officer Sullivan's day of reckoning came 2 weeks later. He was immediately suspended without pay, but he still swaggered into his Port Authority disciplinary hearing, convinced he was the victim. He had his union rep. He had his 22 years of service. He had his procedure. I was following procedure, he stated, his voice full of righteous anger. The passenger was non-compliant and aggressive. I had 2 credible witnesses. I acted to maintain order and protect the public. The board chair, a tired-looking deputy chief, just nodded. Officer Sullivan, we appreciate your statement. We'd now like to review the incident. He cued the monitor. It wasn't just one video. It was a composite. 6 different passenger videos, all perfectly synced, playing on a massive screen. One angle showed his face, contorted in a snarl. Another, from behind, showed Imani's hands, open and non-threatening. A third, in crystal-clear high definition, showed him kicking the FBI badge wallet away. A fourth was a close-up of his partner, Jenkins, pleading with him to stop. The room was silent, as Sullivan was forced to watch his own thuggery. He visibly shrank in his chair. Then, Officer Jenkins was called to testify. Pale but resolute, Jenkins recounted everything. Sullivan's looking for a fight attitude, his refusal to de-escalate, his "I'll handle this" comment. He ignored me, sir, Jenkins said, his voice quiet. He ignored the passenger. He wanted to throw her. Finally, a woman in a severe blue suit from the Department of Justice stood up. The Port Authority's internal disciplinary action is noted, she said. However, Officer Sullivan's actions did not just violate your use of force policy. He actively and knowingly obstructed a federal investigation, resulting in the escape of a high-value federal fugitive. He then assaulted a federal officer. The DOJ will be handling the prosecution from here. Sullivan's union rep quietly put his briefcase on the floor. It was over. He was fired, stripped of his 22-year pension. He was indicted by a federal grand jury. Facing the undeniable video evidence and the testimony of his own partner, he pled guilty to assault on a federal officer and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 36 months in a federal penitentiary, a former cop, now an inmate, in the very system he had so arrogantly abused. For Brenda, the gate agent. Brenda didn't get a public trial. She got something faster, and, in the corporate world, more brutal. She was called into the airline's gleaming downtown headquarters. A friendly HR vice president slid a termination letter across the desk. "But I was just following protocol," she protested, her voice cracking. "The Millers, They looked first class. And she was in a hoodie. She was yelling. I was protecting my passengers." The VP's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Brenda, the Department of Justice is suing us for $50 million. Our stock dropped 8% in a single day. The O'Hare incident is the lead story on every news channel, and our brand is being associated with racial profiling and incompetence." He tapped a printout of her own statement. "You admitted you assumed based on dress. You assumed based on tone. You never once asked to see a boarding pass. You never once tried to de-escalate. You escalated. You called security on a woman who was, in fact, the only person at that gate telling the truth. That's not a protocol violation, Brenda. That's a catastrophic failure of judgment." She was fired, effective immediately, and escorted out by security. Blacklisted by the airline, her name was now a red flag in every major carrier's HR system. She had lost her job, her pension, and her reputation, all because she chose prejudice over procedure. 1 month later, the Chicago field office of the FBI was operating at its usual thrum, a quiet, air-conditioned hum of profound seriousness. Inside Special Agent in Charge Reynolds's office, the only sound was the faint tick of a pen as Imani Wallace tapped it against a ceramic mug. The window to her left overlooked the grey concrete canyons of the city, a view she usually found calming. Today, it just looked like a maze. On the wall opposite her was the board. It was a massive, 6-foot-wide white board, a spiderweb of photos, names, locations, and arrows drawn in red and black marker. It was the entire Ghost human trafficking network, or at least what they had known of it. A month ago, it had been a map of questions. Now, it was a ledger of wins. Dozens of faces were crossed out with thick, satisfying slashes of red. Chad Miller, VP of Braxton Logistics, his smug polo shirt photo now adorned with a red X. Karen Miller, his wife, her society photo similarly defaced. Their entire executive team, their warehouse managers, their contacts in New York and Los Angeles, all of them gone. Swept up in a single, surgical, nationwide operation that had been the largest bust of its kind in a decade. Imani, however, wasn't looking at the red X's. Her eyes were fixed on the one photo that remained pristine, mocking her from the top of the board. The ghost. He was still out there. He's still out there, she said, her voice flat. It was the first thing she'd said in 5 minutes. SSE Reynolds looked up from a file on his desk. He was a man who rarely smiled, but his eyes held a deep, paternal respect when he looked at her. "He is," Reynolds agreed, his voice a low rumble. He leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, steepling his fingers. "He'll surface again. In Prague, or Dubai, or somewhere else. He'll need to rebuild. And when he does, we'll be waiting. But you know what, Imani? He's a general with no army, a king with no kingdom. You didn't just cut off the head of the snake. You obliterated the body." He gestured to the board. "The Braxton Logistics servers. My God, Wallace. It wasn't just a front. It was the whole damn operation. Encrypted ledgers, shipping routes, bank transfers to Shell Corps in Cyprus. They kept meticulous records." He picked up a single sheet of paper from his desk. "We identified 17 victims who were in active transit, scheduled for shipment by Braxton in the next month. 17. One of them was a 15-year-old girl from Moldova who was listed on a manifest as agricultural equipment. She's home with her family now. That's your work." Imani's jaw tightened. She nodded, acknowledging the victory. But it didn't erase the cost. "The director sends his personal commendation," Reynolds said, sliding a heavy, cream-colored envelope across the polished mahogany. The official seal of the Department of Justice was embossed on the back. Imani looked at it, but didn't pick it up. It's for their grace under pressure and exceptional conduct in a hostile civilian environment, Reynolds quoted. A short, bitter laugh escaped Imani's lips. Grace under pressure? Boss, did they see the video? There wasn't a lot of grace. I was being dragged across the floor of Terminal K while 100 people filmed me. The video. That was the other, personal hell part of this. It had gone viral before the FBI's press office could even get a statement out. Karen and cop drag FBI agent. She flashed the badge. Airport assault gets instant karma. For an undercover and surveillance operative, public recognition was a death sentence. Her face was now known. Every time she closed her eyes, she could feel the squeal of her sneakers on the linoleum, the hot, burning shame, the sheer, animalistic rage at Sullivan's grunting face, the wall of phones filming her at her most vulnerable. You've been reassigned for now, Reynolds said gently, reading her mind. No more undercover for a while. You'll be primary case manager on the European side of this. From a desk. I know that's not what you want. It's not, Imani said, her voice tight. But I get it. My face is burned. It is, Reynolds said, and I am truly, deeply sorry for that. But what happened at that gate? Imani, you and I both know you're not the first person that's happened to. You're just the first one it's happened to who was carrying a federal badge. He leaned forward, his demeanor shifting from boss to mentor. You took their prejudice, their entitlement, their racist, sexist, classist assumptions, and you turned it into a weapon. You let them build the trap, and then you slammed it shut on them. You think those 17 victims care about grace? You think the director cares? He tapped the commendation letter. What you did was pure, distilled, operational jujitsu. You lost the battle for the target, and in doing so, you gave us the entire war. It still feels like a loss, she whispered. He's gone. They're gone, too, Reynolds countered. Chad and Karen Miller. Facing a jury, they heard the evidence from their own hard drives. They saw their own text messages. They were part of a conspiracy to lure you, a potential surveillance asset, into a public, messy confrontation. They were proud of it. They thought it was a game. Imani remembered their smug faces. Chad's, I'm a VP, and Karen's, she threatened me. The jury, Reynolds continued, deliberated for 45 minutes. Chad Miller got 25 years. His wife got 12. Their assets are seized. Their Louis Vuitton bag is in an evidence locker. And Sullivan? Imani asked. Oh, Officer Sullivan, Reynolds said, a cold edge entering his voice. He was the centerpiece of the DOJ's civil rights case against the Port Authority. Fired, stripped of his pension, and facing a federal indictment. His partner Jenkins testified against him. The videos were undeniable. He pled guilty to assault on a federal officer and obstruction. He'll be in a federal penitentiary in West Virginia for the next 3 years. And Jenkins? Imani asked. She remembered his pale, nervous face. His Mike, I don't know. Resigned, Reynolds said. Couldn't stomach the job anymore. He sent a letter. To you, an apology. He gestured to a small, plain white envelope on his desk. Imani looked at it. Another thing she didn't want to touch. What about Brenda? Brenda the gate agent. Fired for cause. The airline settled with the DOJ before the ink was dry on the complaint. They're rewriting their entire customer disturbance and implicit bias training. From the top down, you didn't just get a few bad apples, Wallace. You forced them to tear out the whole orchard. Imani finally stood and walked to the window. She watched the L train rattle by on the tracks below, a silver snake in the concrete jungle. 17 victims. Chad and Karen in prison. Sullivan in prison. Brenda fired. Jenkins resigned. An entire airline overhauling its policy. An entire trafficking network in cinders. And the ghost gone. It was a messy ledger, a chaotic balance of wins and losses. Her cover was gone, her anonymity. She would forever be that agent. But the work, the real work, had been done. The anger she felt that day, the hot, blinding rage, it was still there. But it wasn't hot anymore. It was cold, it was hard. It was the foundation she now stood on. She turned back, her eyes landing on the board, on the empty spot where the ghost should be. The past was done. The Millers were in jumpsuits. Sullivan was in a cell. The case was, for all intents and purposes, closed. But he was still out there, and her job wasn't over. She walked back to the desk, ignoring the commendation letter and the apology. She looked her boss dead in the eye, the tired student from the airport terminal gone forever, replaced by the special agent who had come out the other side. "So," Imani Wallace said, her voice all business. "When do we start the briefing on his European contacts?" Reynolds finally, genuinely, smiled. He tapped a file on his desk. "Now." In the end, the karma wasn't just swift, it was devastating. Karen and Chad Miller didn't just miss their flight. They traded their first-class seats for a federal indictment, discovering their small diversion was the final nail in their criminal coffin. Officer Sullivan learned the hardest way possible that his badge wasn't a license to bully, and Brenda the gate agent learned that prejudice has a price. Special Agent Imani Wallace lost her target that day, but she uncovered the entire network. This story is a powerful reminder. You never know who you're talking to, and assumptions based on what someone wears or the color of their skin can be life-altering. What did you think of Sullivan's karma? Was it enough? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love stories where entitlement meets justice, make sure to hit that like button. Share this with everyone you know. And please, subscribe for more true life karma and incredible stories just like this one.